J. William Fulbright represented Arkansan in Congress from 1942 until 1974, 2 years in the House and 30 in the Senate. He was the longest-serving chairman on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and among the most prominent figures of his generation in Congress. During his distinguished career, he had 3 well-established but widely divergent reputations: as an international educator and the founder of the exchange program that bears his name, as a liberal critic of U.S. foreign policy and courageous dissenter, and as a Southern Democrat with an orthodox voting record against civil rights. Shortly after his election to the House, he drew national attention in 1943 as the sponsor of the so-called Fulbright Resolution, which called for the establishment of an international peacekeeping organization and U.S. membership in what was to become the United Nations. He ran successfully for the Senate in 1944, and 6 weeks after the end of the war, introduced a bill proposing the establishment of a program for the promotion of international goodwill through the exchange of students. After graduating from the University of Arkansas in 1925, Fulbright spent 3 formative years as a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford, and this experience informed his conception of the exchange program. Later he called the recipients of these awards grandchildren of Cecil Rhodes scattered throughout the world. He also immediately recognized the implications of the nuclear age for international politics and later called the atomic bombings of Japan the immediate cause of my sponsorship of the legislation to set up an exchange program. However, the unique selling point of his bill was to fund exchanges without burdening the federal budget. Fulbright proposed using the windfall revenues in foreign currencies that the United States was accruing overseas from the sale of wartime surpluses. Commodities such as fuel, vehicles, building material, and foodstuffs that the historian Sam Lebovich has called war junk. President Truman signed the legislation that came to be known as the Fulbright Act into law on August 1, 1946, and it laid the foundations for his reputation as an international educator. Fulbright commented on his second legacy in his last speech in the Senate in 1974. He thought he would be remembered as a dissenter. Throughout his career, he said, he found himself resisting what seemed to be the excesses of the Cold War, culminating in the tragic and unnecessary hot war in Vietnam. In the 1950s, for example, Fulbright was an early and spirited critic of the excesses of Senator Joseph McCarthy, who regularly slighted him by calling him half-bright. In the mid-60s, he had a colossal falling out with his long-standing personal and political friend, President Lyndon B. Johnson, over the escalation of the Vietnam War. Fulbright became one of the most prominent critics of the Johnson administration and a congressional leader in the anti-war movement. Fulbright publicly lamented what he considered the biggest mistake in his political career, his support for the Tonkin Bay Resolution in 1965, which gave the president sweeping powers to expand the war in Vietnam. But Fulbright was publicly reticent about the biggest domestic political mistake he made in his career: his deplorable voting record on civil rights. However, Fulbright was not a segregationist who opposed integration per se. He was among that small group of moderate Southern Democrats who recognized the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision on school desegregation as the law of the land and accepted it as equitable and inevitable. Fulbright, who graduated second in his class from George Washington University Law School in 1935 and taught constitutional law at the University of Arkansas, belonged to a group of so-called gradualists who had procedural and jurisdictional concerns about the speed of the implementation of integration prescribed by federal courts. Gradualism was an argument for incremental, as opposed to radical, social change, and gradualists wanted to slow desegregation down to enhance its acceptance. Fulbright also felt that desegregation needed to be flanked by other broader measures, such as the improvement of education or standards of living. Integration would take time because it depended on what Fulbright called the slow conversion of the human heart. However, Fulbright also consistently justified his voting record in terms of sober political expediency. If you oppose your constituents too directly on an issue too close to their hearts, you are not going to get elected. And his constituents were not about to be persuaded on civil rights. Fulbright also thought he had a compact with the people of Arkansas. It was that if he represented the people of Arkansas on the issues closest to their hearts, they had given him, as the other part of that contract, freedom to act as he felt as he should act in the field of foreign policy. In 1956, Harper's Magazine observed that liberals found Fulbright's liberal approach to international affairs and education incompatible with his conservative stand on labor and civil rights. Fulbright was confounding and paradoxical. The contrast between Fulbright's cosmopolitan liberalism and Arkansan conservatism was an established part of his public political persona. The Saturday Evening Post called him an egghead from the Ozarks. Time gave him the dubious honor of being perhaps the least belligerent Southern senator on civil rights, and Life printed a generously illustrated full-length feature on the enigmatic Fulbright, describing him as an aloof, thorny, unpredictable intellectual, shaped by Oxford and the Ozarks, who was responsible for the establishment of his famous scholarship program and disappointingly reticent on civil rights at the same time. After Fulbright retired from the Senate in 1974, he took the opportunity to publicly set the record straight as he saw it. In fact, there are a few rather simple explanations for the so-called paradoxes in my career. While believing in the necessity of international cooperation and of the United Nations idea, I also have believed that education and economic opportunity were the best avenue to racial justice in the United States. I did not vote for civil rights legislation prior to the late 60s for two very simple reasons. First, because I doubted its efficacy. Second, because my constituents would not have tolerated it. I felt able to challenge some of their strong feelings on such matters as the Vietnam War. I did not feel free to go against them on the emotionally charged issue of race. Fulbright ultimately anticipated that his foot-dragging, equivocation, and aversion of political risk on civil rights would cast a dark shadow on his career. At the age of 84, he observed, "I don't think that the gradualist school I belong to, looking back now, will receive the approval of history." That was a prescient analysis. In this context, the analysis of another famous Arkansan politician who worked in Fulbright's office while he was a student at Georgetown in the 60s is instructive.
I used to argue, he used to let me argue with him when I was 22 years old. We argued about civil rights all the time. And I don't think that, his civil rights record stands up well in history as anything other than a way to keep getting elected so he could do other good things he could do.
This is the Fulbright Act in its entirety, 2 pages of terminologically dense legislation, with a complicated title referencing its amendment of the Surplus Property Act of 1944. It doesn't appear to have anything to do with education or exchanges. Fulbright knew that the idea of funding educational exchanges was potentially controversial. The mechanics of the legislation were little understood at the time, and with a combination of guile and procedural finesse, he moved the bill through the Senate with no debate and no roll call vote. Fulbright decided not to take the risk of an open appeal to the idealism of my colleagues in order to get the legislation passed. An influential senator told him later that he would have killed the bill instantly had he understood it in the first place. According to the foremost historian of the legislation, the Fulbright Exchange Program ultimately was the product of one man, Senator Fulbright. The Fulbright Act did 5 things. First, it made the State Department the sole disposal agency of the non-convertible foreign currencies that the U.S. government owned overseas, generated by the sale of wartime surpluses in former theaters of war. Second, it earmarked contingents of these foreign currencies for bilateral exchanges. They could be used to cover the comprehensive costs of travel and maintenance for U.S. grantees going abroad, but they could only cover the costs of travel for Fulbrighters from abroad to their ports of entry in the United States. The legislation had no provisions for funding expenses in dollars related to the execution of the program in the United States. And it never would have gotten off the ground without the passage of a second piece of landmark legislation, the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948, which provided the urgently needed dollars to cover program costs in the United States. The program relied above all on American philanthropy. The generosity of American colleges, universities, foundations, and civic organizations that covered the on-site costs of incoming Fulbrighters with combinations of cash and in-kind support, ranging from scholarships and tuition remissions to room and board. The program was a public-private partnership funded by War Junk, Smith-Mundt, and the generosity of American civil society. Third, it required that the United States and foreign governments conclude executive agreements to execute the program. These agreements prescribed the establishment of special binational commissions to help manage bilateral exchanges. Between 1947 and 1952, the United States concluded 22 so-called Fulbright agreements with countries in former theaters of war in Europe, Asia, and the Pacific. In 1954, legislation that facilitated the export and sale of U.S. agricultural surpluses overseas, especially wheat, fortuitously provided a new source of revenue in foreign currencies that could be used to fund the Fulbright program. Revenues from the sale of agricultural and other surpluses not only helped sustain the program in countries where it was funded by diminishing war junk revenues, they also allowed the United States to expand the program globally. In the next 10 years, it concluded executive agreements establishing Fulbright commissions in 24 new countries, including 8 in Latin America, 4 in Africa, and 1 in communist Yugoslavia. Binational commissions provided the program with its historical, philosophical, and institutional foundations. Although the program has been managed unilaterally out of U.S. diplomatic missions in over 100 countries since the passage of the Fulbright-Hayes Act in 1961, the 50-odd countries with binational Fulbright commissions account for well over 75% of the program's alumni. Fourth, these Fulbright commissions had boards consisting of equal numbers of U.S. and foreign citizens that were instrumental in the promotion, planning, and execution of the program as a joint venture. One of the core assumptions of the program's foundational philosophy of binationalism was that the interests of the United States and other countries would best be served by giving them an important voice in program plans, decisions, and administration. Thus, although the U.S. government was the official source of the funds and might have operated the program unilaterally, control was shared from the beginning. Largely as a result, the program received an almost immediate acceptability and recognition abroad that it has never lost. Fifth, the Act authorized the President to appoint a 10-person Board of Foreign Scholarships, or BFS, the forerunner of today's J. William Fulbright Scholarship Board, the FFSB. By design, it was populated by acknowledged academics and educational leaders, not political appointees, and the Act entrusted these private citizens as academics and educators with the governance and supervision of a public program, including policy making. Fulbright called the creation of the Board of Foreign Scholarships the first step in insulating the program from current political interests. The central task of the BFS was to ensure the academic integrity of the program and its independence from partisan political agendas. Its stature enhanced the popularity and credibility of the program at home and abroad from the very start. At its first meeting, the BFS also set the tone for the program by observing, while the Fulbright program should certainly implement the general aims of United States foreign policy, it should not be utilized as an instrument to effectuate short-term policies directed towards particular countries, and that care should be taken to avoid all appearances of cultural imperialism. The reputation of the Fulbright program was firmly established by the time President Kennedy invited the individuals instrumental in its establishment to the White House to commemorate its 15th anniversary in 1961. The program had over 50,000 alums, and it was operating on 5 continents in 41 countries with Fulbright commissions. Kennedy acknowledged the Fulbright program as one of the great acts of creative and constructive statesmanship in the post-war period, and praised Fulbright for seeing both the need and the opportunity to establish a large-scale exchange program as a two-way street. He also thanked Fulbright for his continued leadership in this field, which helped lay the foundations for the Fulbright-Hayes Act as a firm basis for moving forward in the 60s. The following points of the Fulbright-Hayes Act merit special attention. First, it provided funding for the program as a line item in the annual federal budget. and it stipulated that U.S. dollars could also be used to purchase foreign currencies for the execution of the program overseas. Second, by doing so, it eliminated the dependence of the program on revenues generated by the sale of surpluses owned by the United States abroad, such as war junk or wheat. This facilitated the global expansion of the program. Third, it also created a second derivative branch of the Fulbright Program. Exchanges funded unilaterally by the U.S. government and managed unilaterally out of U.S. embassies without bilateral agreements or the establishment of the program's trademark binational commissions. This part of the program, strictly speaking, is a U.S. government program. However, in countries with Fulbright commissions, it is a joint venture. Fourth, it also introduced the idea of cost-sharing agreements with countries that had Fulbright commissions. This created an important new source of revenue in foreign currencies for the program, which were particularly important because the revenues from the sale of agricultural surpluses overseas evaporated in the late 60s. Furthermore, the U.S. government appropriations for the program fell dramatically after peaking in the mid-1960s. In 2013, they were lower in constant inflation-adjusted dollars than in the mid-60s, according to this FFSB report, and they have been stagnant for a decade since then. Foreign countries, however, have enthusiastically increased their support for the Fulbright program, especially in the last 30 years. Their cash and in-kind contributions quadrupled from $26 million in 1993 to over $100 million in 2010. And they have been instrumental in doubling the number of Fulbright grantees from a low point of just over 4,000 in 1997 to well over 8,000 today. Fifth, it mandated the Board of Foreign Scholarships to submit annual reports to the Congress and to make reports to the public in the United States and abroad to develop a better understanding of and support for the program, to tell the Fulbright story to the world. Unfortunately, after 55 years, the quality and punctuality of these reports has collapsed. The most recent one, covering the fiscal year 2019, was terse and lacked all sorts of statistical documentation, and there was no FFSB report at all commemorating the 75th anniversary year of the program in 2021. The first phase in what ended up as a dramatic revision of the Fulbright program narrative was well-intentioned and constructive. Members of the J. William Fulbright Scholarship Board suggested that the program's image needed to be refreshed. In response to the FFSB's initiative, ECA turned to its go-to contractor, IIE, to manage this project, which was launched as the Fulbright Marketing Initiative in 2016 with the help of two reputable marketing agencies. Hadaway Communications assumed responsibility for market surveys, research, and reworking the brand narrative for the program. And Tri Branding and Design assumed responsibility for crafting a new visual identity for the program. This started with updating the old Fulbright logo, originally introduced by the FFSB in 1993, with a more contemporary design. And it also entailed a comprehensive visual strategy, ranging from typography, colors, and graphic design, to guidance on the identification of compelling images for storytelling and social media. The new visual identity Tribe developed for the Fulbright program was rolled out in a big way for the first time on a handsome website IIE managed for ECA to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the program in 2021. In November 2017, Hadaway presented a communication strategy and draft brand formula to the various institutional stakeholders in the program that focused on education and exchange, networking, and connections. And it proposed a preliminary brand narrative text built around these three functions. After consulting with ECA, IIE, and the FFSB, Hadaway established two other stakeholder advisory groups to solicit input on the brand narrative. The so-called Fulbright Marketing Initiative Stakeholder Advisory Group had 16 members from a wide range of institutions associated with the program, including 4 FFSB members. And a Fulbright Commission Director Advisory Group consisted of a globally representative cross-section of 12 executive directors. At its first meeting with Hadaway in November 2017, the FFSB explicitly wished to see Senator Fulbright, the program's legacy, and its governmental sponsorship referenced in the narrative. and both advisory groups subsequently provided input along the same lines, with the executive directors of binational commissions emphasizing the program's co-sponsorship. Hadaway then drafted two different versions of a brand narrative, Brand A and Brand B, which were variations on a core text, and it tested both in a survey of 1,000 randomly chosen American college and university students. Both narratives tested equally well, with 78% of the respondents saying they would tell others about the program after hearing the narrative, and 88% of the respondents saying they would be more likely to apply after hearing the narratives. The major differences between the Brand A and Brand B narratives were 5 points in two passages in the Brand B version that were more emphatic about the historical origins of the program, its organizational structures, and the nature of its opportunities. That it was founded by Senator J. William Fulbright in the aftermath of World War II, that it is administered by the U.S. Department of State in coordination with binational commissions around the world, and that it offers merit-based opportunities. Although the Brand A and Brand B narratives tested equally well, Hadaway ascertained, using its testing methodology, that these 5 points did not resonate especially well with the Gen Z respondents in the survey. Therefore, it edited them out of its final revised brand narrative to simplify it and make it more palatable for this target group. It replaced references to Fulbright in the aftermath of World War II with a simple temporal marker for more than 70 years, and deleted the references to the State Department binational commissions and merit-based opportunities. Striking these passages made the brand narrative ahistorical, apolitical, and vacuous. For a program sponsored and funded by states for their citizens, it also has no civic dimension. In a memo sent to stakeholders in May 2018, Hadaway ascertained that the brand narrative accurately conveys Fulbright's unique value in an aspirational way. However, it also commented on the serious reservations some stakeholders had about the narrative's shortcomings. Some participants in every group, but especially FFSB members, want the overall brand narrative to include the fact that Fulbright is run and funded by the U.S. government along with partner countries. While survey data showed this idea doesn't particularly resonate with U.S. students, stakeholders nonetheless want the brand narrative to be transparent and to educate audiences about Fulbright's basic structure and roots. The final draft of the revised brand narrative disregarded this critical input. So did ECA. The final brand narrative described a Fulbright program without Senator Fulbright and without the program's legacy. In May 2019, ECA published an 82-page guide to the Fulbright program's new visual identity and brand language. The final brand narrative ECA authored did not depart substantially from the one Hadaway had proposed to meet the needs of a narrow demographic, Gen Z students in the U.S. However, there was one phenomenal exception. The ECA brand narrative began by asserting that Fulbright was led by the U.S. government. This is a surprising claim for two reasons. First of all, language about U.S. government leadership had not been included in any of the draft brand narratives stakeholders had reviewed. And second, this kind of unilateral and nationalist claim is unprecedented in the history of the program. Since when did the U.S. government lead 160 other countries in an academic exchange program? And how did it do that? One may only speculate about what inspired ECA to indulge in this kind of rhetorical excess. Perhaps it was a reflection of ECA's new functional bureau strategy, with its emphasis on strategic communications and advancing American leadership, interests, influence, and values. We don't know. The murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis on May 25, 2020, suddenly put Fulbright's voting record on civil rights into a completely different context for two institutions deeply invested in his legacy. The University of Arkansas in Fayetteville and the State Department's Bureau for Educational and Cultural Affairs. The commemoration of Fulbright on the flagship campus of the University of Arkansas had a tradition all its own. The Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences, housed in Old Main, the central historical landmark of the university, was named after him in 1982. A Fulbright Peace Fountain, designed by the famous Arkansan architect Fay Jones and funded internationally by private donations, was erected in front of Old Main in 1998. And a bronze statue of him by Greta Bader took its place between the Peace Fountain and the entrance of Old Main in 2008. After the Floyd murder, black student activists, citing Fulbright's voting record on civil rights, called for the removal of Fulbright's name from the College of Arts and Sciences and his statue from the campus. Their protests picked up momentum in the summer of 2020 and precipitated a contentious year of institutional reflection, committee work, and review. In July 2021, the Board of Trustees of the University of Arkansas system decided to leave Fulbright's name on the college and his statue intact, while substantially enhancing the contextualization of Fulbright's complex legacy on campus. By the end of 2021, the Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences had put together a collection of resources. Under the heading, The Fulbright Paradox, and posted them online as part of an ongoing project to contextualize Fulbright's legacies. ECA's response to the surge of protests for social justice in the summer of 2020 was dramatically different from that of the University of Arkansas. It made the perfunctory decision to tacitly take down the pages on its website that had provided extensive background information on Senator Fulbright and the history of the program for decades. And it posted a mere 3 paragraphs of boilerplate from the new brand narrative in its place. This was the new history of the Fulbright program. The material ECA took down can be retrieved from the Internet Archive, and the Fulbright history page had links to 2 other pages. The first was a laudatory 11-page biography of Fulbright that praised his unequal contribution to international affairs, distinguished political career in Congress, profound influence on America's foreign policy, and his vision for the extraordinary exchange program bearing his name. However, it did have one major shortcoming. It failed to mention Fulbright's voting record on civil rights. This biography page also had links to 2 other pages. The first was to a collection of over 50 of his speeches digitally archived by the University of Arkansas libraries. And this page links to 4 other assets: a biography of Fulbright, a chronology of his life and career, a bibliography of 35 entries, including 4 Fulbright biographies, and a tool for browsing the collection's 60 entries, with 6 of these entries being documents related to Fulbright's positions on civil rights. The second link on the biography page was to a collection of 17 quotes by Fulbright on his philosophy of international education that have been liberally cited for decades. The history page also had a link to materials on the early years of the program, where ECA had posted and updated 35 pages from what is undoubtedly still the best brief introduction to the origins, philosophy, and structure of the program, a history that the BFS commissioned Donald Cook, a veteran Foreign Service officer, to write for its annual report marking the 75th anniversary of the program in 1971. 5 chapters of this history were posted under the report's original chapter headings. The fact that all of these resources disappeared from the ECA website in the late summer of 2020, without a word and without a trace, was a sign of things to come in 2021. On January 1st, 2021, a 75th anniversary website managed for ECA by the so-called communications team at IIE went online. It provided a platform for the digital commemoration of the 75th anniversary year of the program, and focused on storytelling, with an impressive collection of testimonials. However, it never mentioned the name of Senator J. William Fulbright once in the course of the entire year. It also had a brief history page that consisted of a timeline with 19 interactive images or tiles accompanied by one-line texts. 3 of these images are particularly noteworthy. The first one is the iconic picture of President Truman signing the Fulbright Act on August 1, 1946. Witnessed by Fulbright and William Benton, the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs. However, the picture caption does not identify Fulbright or Benton, nor does it say anything about how the legislation established the framework of the program. The second image, dated 1958, shows Jeff Davis Daly, Jr., the first Fulbrighter on record with a disability, being escorted in London by an unidentified man, Senator Fulbright. The third image is supposed to show President Kennedy signing the Fulbright-Hays Act in 1961, but this image actually is a detail from Kennedy signing the Foreign Assistance Act in 1962. Here is a picture of Kennedy signing the Fulbright-Hays Act in 1961, with Senator Fulbright on the far left. One way or the other, he's out of the picture. In June 2021, in the middle of the program's 75th anniversary year, ECA posted a new page on its website with the title Fulbright Program Overview. It consisted of 4 short paragraphs on the program and 3 paragraphs on Fulbright with a few bibliographic references. This is the only time J. William Fulbright is mentioned on the entire website. The first paragraph provides a brief description of the program, which also acknowledges Fulbright's role in authoring the program's foundational legislation. The second paragraph does not attempt to historically contextualize Fulbright at all, but censures him in 3 sentences. First, it frames its evaluation of Fulbright's mixed legacy in terms of racial justice. Second, it focuses its analysis of the consequences of that mixed legacy exclusively on his voting record on civil rights. And third, it appeals to the ideals of the Fulbright program to censure Fulbright for his obvious shortcomings as a Southern Democrat. The next paragraph withholds any recognition of Fulbright for the establishment of the program, and it assigns its legacy to hundreds of thousands of distinguished and diverse alumni. It then proceeds to set a new priority for the program. The program and its administrators are deeply committed to redoubling efforts to increase and enhance the Fulbright program's diversity, equity, and inclusion. ECA's dismissal of Fulbright fails to take the complexities and constraints Fulbright faced as an Arkansan politician into account, nor did it acknowledge that he was doing good things and bad things at the same time in the 50s and 60s. The Fulbright program was non-discriminatory from the start, and it is important to remember that it probably did more for the international education of minorities than almost any other piece of legislation that came that early. Under the program, people did go abroad as scholars, teachers, or artists, absolutely regardless of race, creed, or color. Fulbright also observed that the recipients of Fulbright Awards may be considered as grandchildren of Cecil Rhodes, scattered throughout the world. If Rhodes was their grandfather, Fulbright was their father. And this is what a cohort of some of his children looked like in the mid-50s, with many of them coming from the global South. The decision of ECA not to acknowledge Fulbright for his considerable accomplishments in the course of the 75th anniversary year of the program is the most radical form of historical revisionism, erasure from the public record to falsify the past. J. William Fulbright was not acknowledged at all in the course of the well-orchestrated 1 hour and 45-minute gala celebration of the program's 75th anniversary at the Kennedy Center in November 2021, an event built around compelling video testimonials. However, ECA had to script something about the origins of the program, and this is how they chose to do it without mentioning Fulbright.
After the U.S. Senate's allies defeated fascism in World War II, the U.S. Congress recognized the need to avert future wars by fostering new generations of leaders with a commitment to international collaboration and understanding. The Congress created the Fulbright Program in 1946, and its members have sustained that support for 75 years.
This passage disingenuously attributes the foundational insights and agency for the creation of the Fulbright Program collectively to Congress, not individually to Fulbright, who conceived the exchange program as a peace program in September 1945, and who moved the legislation through Congress in 1946 without taking the risk of an open appeal to the idealism of his colleagues because they would have killed it. Given the numbers, the assertion that the members of Congress have enthusiastically sustained support for the Fulbright program for 75 years is inaccurate too. In January 2023, a new Fulbright Program Gateway website managed by the Fulbright Communications team at IIE went online. It imitated the layout and aesthetic of the 75th anniversary website and recycled a substantial amount of its content. It was rolled out as a new global portal for the Fulbright program. It had a pull-down menu with links to a program overview that did not mention Senator Fulbright, and the timeline from the 75th anniversary website with the same pictures and the same omissions. After members of the international Fulbright community consulted the DEIA pages, many of them were concerned, and justifiably so. ECA appears to have conflated the program's mission of promoting mutual understanding with ECA's self-appointed mission of promoting DEIA in all aspects of its work. This text also had a link to ECA's DEIA statement from November 2022. Furthermore, in its text on the Fulbright program, ECA confuses the program's historical commitment to cultural diversity with its own contemporary DEIA agenda by projecting it into the past and maintaining that a hallmark of the Fulbright program has been its long-standing commitment to DEIA. On the DEIA strategy page, people were surprised to read that reflecting DEIA in all its forms was identified as the organizing framework for the Fulbright program's 75th anniversary year in 2021. Who identified DEIA as the organizing framework, and why did they not tell anybody about this at the beginning of 2021? Has the Fulbright program morphed into an American DEIA program? Does a policy agenda that is politically contentious in the United States provide a sound basis for the promotion of mutual understanding? The admittedly conservative American Heritage Foundation doesn't think so. This ends my remarks on the dramatic revision of the Fulbright program narrative in recent years, to the detriment of the program and U.S. public diplomacy, I would argue. I will end with two recommendations. First, if you are genuinely interested in the contextualization of the complex legacies of Senator Fulbright, go to the Fulbright College of Arts and Sciences website at the University of Arkansas. Second, if you are interested in what the Fulbright program is supposed to be about, read the Statement of Objectives and the Policies of the J. William Fulbright Scholarship Board. It is a foundational document, and it is online.
Question. You've made the point, I think here and in other forums, that by canceling Fulbright, ECA is really endangering, I shouldn't put it quite that strongly, but the cancellation of Fulbright really is a danger to the image of the United States and the State Department. Why is that? Can you elaborate on that a little more, please?
U.S. public diplomacy should be fact-based. So it can be based on facticity. And to pretend or to dismiss or to cancel or to omit, that's simply incompatible with the conduct of democratic foreign policy.
Lonnie John Bader. I want to make reference to a theologian. That would be Martin Luther, who would certainly subscribe to the idea that we are all sinners. And I wonder if you could continue to reflect on the fact that many men and women in public office are not perfect. That they are both good and not good at the same time. I think this is true of all of us at all times, and that we have an obligation to educate each other about the context of this thinking. It's one reason why the Fulbright Association continues to name our Fulbright Prize the J. William Fulbright Prize for International Understanding, because it is possible to both advance grand vision and to make mistakes that you may regret?
Thank you, John. Fulbright knew exactly what he was doing wrong. He was confronted with a moral dilemma and made a political decision. And that political decision in 1956 and 1962 and 1968 was to stay in office and to win the election. You have to imagine, in 1968, Fulbright won his seat again in the Senate. Yeah, Winthrop Rockefeller, a Republican, was the first Republican elected in Arkansas since before the Civil War. And George Wallace won Arkansas as a third-party candidate. What was his program? Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. So I don't know if we can second-guess Senator Fulbright on saying what he should have done under those circumstances, because he did the wrong thing. Yeah? But he did that to stay in office. And Martin Luther King also, in his letter from the Birmingham jail, said, you know, there are two groups of people who are really guilty. It's the people who did the bad things and said the bad things. And it's the good people who didn't say anything and didn't do anything. And Fulbright was in that group. He was reticent. He saw race as a tremendous political liability and was constantly afraid that he was going to be undercut from the right, because he wasn't enthusiastic about his opposition to civil rights at all.
Hi, Lonnie. Thank you, Peter Kovach. Very valuable insights. I would just comment that early in your presentation, you mentioned that Fulbright identified economic inequality as a major issue in the race situation. And I would just say the last 3 years of his life, Dr. King was on very much the same page. And that might be something we should emphasize in the counter narrative. The other thing I would comment as a retired Foreign Service officer who served on 3 Fulbright commissions, including creating one, is that frankly, there's something about diplomacy in the field. It's anthropological, and something about diplomacy in Washington that's bureaucratic, and that sometimes ne'er the two shall meet. In all 3 commissions, we had major conflicts with ECA or ECA/Board of Foreign Scholarships, all of which we won eventually, but through some for one, I had to go to Vice President Cheney to get him to sort of knock heads, and IIE was a major culprit in that particular instance. So there is this anthropological nature of what we do in the field. And I would say one of the problems of diplomacy today is we listen to the field less and less. And I think that goes for Fulbright too. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's an astute observation. Public diplomacy made for domestic political consumption inside of the Beltway is something different than what you got to do when you're out in the field. And this is it's peculiar how this has happened. The ECA has crafted a narrative based on a market surveying with a specific demographic in the United States, and it's turned a marketing narrative into an institutional history. Now, it was maybe as good as fine as a marketing narrative, but to use that as an all-purpose document for the entire program is unwise. And you're right. Nick Cull said, important part of public diplomacy is listening, and it's the conversation, Walter Johnson called Smith-Mundt and the Fulbright Act the beginning of a great conversation of the American people with the world. It's about having the conversation.
Okay. Hi, I'm going to be representing the online Q&A that's going on right now. Our first question is from Ambassador Greta Morris. What is the current balance between American and foreign participants in the Fulbright program? Is it considered important to achieve parity between American and foreign participants?
Just put that chart up. The currency of the Fulbright program is grantees. Okay, so you have to figure out where the money's coming from. It all goes into one pot, and you have grantees. So if you just take a brief look, these are numbers from the FFSB reports, the reporting which has collapsed, by the way, that show the history of the Fulbright program in terms of the grantee levels and the different categories of grantees. And as you can see, there's always been a little asymmetry between the number of foreign grantees and the number of U.S. participants. Okay, U.S. is blue, foreign is orange, total is gray. But what happens in the mid-60s, this is Vietnam. This is the Vietnam War. And that leads to a dramatic cut in funds. This is a bicentennial. That's a little bit of a glitch. Grantee levels didn't reach 1966 levels until the beginning of the 2000s. Okay? And the fact that they have gone up since 2000 is related to the fact U.S. government funding after 9/11 doubled, went from 120 to 240, and then to 270. But that's a smoke and mirrors increase. And the binational commission funding quadrupled. This has been sort of a historical constant in the program, and it really depends on how the grants are being funded for Americans overseas, but also how they're being funded additionally in the United States from other sources outside of the Fulbright program proper.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then I'm just going to ask another question. We have a question from Matthew Asada, a FSO and visiting senior fellow at USC. First, he has a comment. Sorry. Okay. Thank you for the engaging presentation. I recently returned from the University of Arkansas and the Special Collections, an amazing resource for another project, and read The Price of Empire, from which you have quoted. I appreciate the focus on the Department of State, and you have done an excellent job of thinking how they have administered the program. I'd like to ask about the Fulbright Board and its composition. Has the board become more political, less nonpartisan, or simply less focused on the exercising oversight of these processes? I would have expected some board members to have pushed back on the perceived woke policies to erase Fulbright, as well as some Democratic appointees more interested in ensuring that it maintains its linkages/history with the gradualist Democratic Senator, that this is the heart of the international engagement.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the comment and thank you for the question. The BFS, now the FFSB, was established to maintain the autonomy of the program, both from bureaucratic interference and from political interference. It was populated by leading academics and educators. Oscar Hanlon from Harvard, the father of ethnic history. John Hope Franklin, the father of African American history. James Billington, Librarian of Congress, great Russian historian. You look at the first 30 years, wow, yeah? And these people connected the program to the academic community and to the institutional community in virtue of their stature. But at the same time, you have the political appointees creeping in. So they weren't political appointees in the beginning, but they became political appointees. And the first person to do that was Lyndon B. Johnson, who appointed Walt Rothschild, the engineer of the bombing of Vietnam, to the J. William Fulbright Scholarship Board. So you can see that LBJ and Senator Fulbright had some issues that they were addressing here. So there's always been some academic representation on the board, but not enough. And it's become increasingly a group of political appointees who don't feel particularly committed to the program, nor do they understand it very well. They're committed to the president who appointed them to do something for him. So if we're allowed to wish something, I said, let's wish that the president starts putting people on the FFSB who have more of a traditional academic background and are connected to the international education community in the United States. I do want to point out, however, that both Tom Healy and Jeff Fleich, as chairs of the FSB, did a wonderful job leading, but also they experienced a lot of resistance at ECA as well.
Lonnie, a question I'd like to put in today, particularly thinking about Harriet Mayer Fulbright, because one of her projects was to make sure the film about the senator, that includes a lot of interviews of him and Harriet that also, I think, contextualize him, the man, the mission, the message. Would you comment on that and just share your view of it, and then just remind people they can get it on YouTube and it's a perfect primer?
This was about a 1-minute documentary which was put together in 2010. It's the best short introduction to Senator Fulbright and his career. There is a little bit of heroization there. That's the nature of the beast. But it's also available on the website of the Fulbright Association, along with other resources on his biography. And John, give me that www.fulbright.org.
For us, for FA?
Yeah.
Yeah, Fulbright.org. Yeah.
Fulbright.org. If you want to see the film, it lasts an hour. It's a really very, very nice piece of work.
Go to About and then J. William Fulbright, and you'll see those resources.
My clip from Clinton came out of that film.
Yes.
Honey, what can we do as ordinary citizens? Please come to the mic.
And introduce yourself.
I'm Shah Zakram. I'm a board member of PDCA. Board member. What can we do as ordinary citizens to sort of change the narrative? I mean, is it social media? I mean, how can I've worked with John for 10 years with Fulbright Association. We're vested in this, the Fulbright program. How can we fight this and contribute?
It's a State Department narrative. So that's the story they're telling. That's the story that ECA is telling. I would like to suggest that ECA is telling a story which PD is not going to be able to use very well, and it's not helpful out in the field. So maybe that's a conversation that PD should have with ECA about this, about the Fulbright. It reflects a lot of domestic political tensions and concerns, which are really difficult to put in the forefront of the entire exchange program. Certainly, I'm in favor of social justice. I don't want to apologize for Fulbright's miserable voting record on civil rights. But there are other issues that on a bilateral basis, people might want to put on the agenda of the program too.
Hi, my name is Alexis Posel. I'm a junior here at GW. I had a question regarding, the Fulbright program alongside other programs are not the first to face this type of controversy. Very common within US history and especially in foreign relations. My question is, you say that to erase Fulbright would be a disservice or would be to the detriment of the program, yet there still are a lot of people applying to the program, similar to the roads program that has had controversy, and applications keep increasing. So if we're seeing an increase in applications, is there really something wrong there, or why does it matter that we change back or revert to what we were doing before that?
There's a moral philosopher at Oxford by the name of Nigel Biggard, who has defended Cecil Rhodes against the inaccurate claims that were made. He's very interesting because he's concerned about moral problems. And he's written a book called Colonialism, A Reckoning, that came out of the entire Rhodes controversy in Oxford. The amazing thing is people had forgotten about Fulbright's civil rights record until it was picked up as an isolated issue in the wake of the Floyd news. What did people forget first about Fulbright? They forgot about his civil rights record after the civil rights legislation passed. What did they forget about then? They forgot about his dissent. Yeah? And at the end of the life, the only thing anybody remembered about Bill Fulbright, who had been sort of canonized also, highly honored, was his record as an international educator. But if you go back and look at all of his contemporaries and look at Time or Life, all of these magazines, this was Fulbright. He was being a dissenter, he was voting against civil rights, being an international educator all at the same time. So if the only thing you know about Bill Fulbright is that he had a terrible civil rights voting record between 1956 and 1968, I think that's the wrong lens to look at him or to look at the Fulbright.
I have a question from a former Fulbrighter, actually. She said, I am a Fulbright alumna. I have had my academic career shaped by the Fulbright year at the University of Illinois and its enormous professional impact. Given the infamous revisionism of the narrative about Senator Fulbright that you just presented in a compelling way, I would like to ask what sort of action we Fulbrighters could do to initiate the ECA to undo its falsification of history. Thank you.
Why don't you drop him a note? Yeah. The State Department institutions speak with authority. They're silent with authority too. And a public discourse doesn't hurt in a situation like this. And what was done with no public discourse. So we can still have that conversation.
I think that's time. Lonnie. Great. I want to thank you, Lonnie. We needed that reminder that our bigger than life historical heroes have human flaws. And J. William Fulbright was not the only one. We have to, pardon me, recognize those flaws, learn from them, and celebrate the important legacies that they've left us. We were also pleased today to have John Bader, Executive Director of the Fulbright Association. John, why don't you just stand for a moment so our online audience can... And thank you to today's event coordinators. Bill Wanlund. Bill, where are you? Let everyone recognize the work you've done. Bill, as you probably know, is the author of our the column in the weekly update worth noting, and it's worth reading. And Sherry Mueller, our immediate past president. Sherry, and to our tech hosts, Alistair Somerville, still working over there, Gabby Stahl, and someone who jumped in the last minute from GW, Alexis, I'm sorry, what is your last name? Posel. Thank you. The This session is typical of post-COVID era. We are an intimate group here, but there are many more online from around the country. Join us on Tuesday, October 31st, when our speaker will be former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, whose topic will be reimagining public diplomacy. This will be a Zoom-only event. Registration information will be on the landing page of the PDCA website. Is that correct, Gabby? Sometime this week. If you can't find registration information, you're always welcome to email me at president@publicdiplomacy.org. Glad all of you could be with us today. First Mondays are brought to you by the USC Annenberg Center on Communication, Leadership, and Policy, the GWU Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communication, and the Public Diplomacy Council of America. I'm Joel Fishman. I should have said this up front, president of PDCA. We look forward to seeing you on Zoom on Tuesday, October 31st at 12 noon for Secretary Gates. Thank you.